Most men are taught to ask the wrong question. They ask, "Is she interested in me?" when the real question is, "Why now?" Timing reveals motives far more accurately than words ever will. Attraction explains pursuit. Urgency explains pressure. And when urgency appears suddenly after years of delay, it is rarely romantic. It is situational. There is a pattern playing out quietly in modern dating that men sense but struggle to articulate. A woman who spent her 20s moving freely through relationships, experiences and partners suddenly reaches her early 30s and announces she is ready. Ready for commitment, ready for something serious, ready to settle down. The language sounds reassuring, the tone sounds mature, but the timing is doing most of the talking. And timing, unlike promises, does not lie. This shift does not happen in a vacuum. It happens when leverage changes. In your 20s, time feels infinite. Options feel abundant. Consequences feel theoretical. In your 30s, biology, competition, and outcomes stop being abstract ideas and start becoming measurable realities. When those realities change, behavior follows. Not because character suddenly transformed, but because incentives did. Men are often told to view this moment as growth, as wisdom earned through experience, as a woman finally realizing what matters. That narrative is comforting but incomplete. Growth is slow. Growth leaves a trail of consistency. Growth does not appear suddenly when circumstances tighten. Strategy does. High partner count behavior conditions the mind in ways most people never examine. Repeated short-term relationships train the brain to prioritize novelty over depth, exit over repair, comparison over commitment. Each new partner reinforces the idea that dissatisfaction is solved by replacement rather than resolution. Over time, this becomes a default operating system, not consciously chosen, but neurologically reinforced. By the time a woman reaches her early 30s with a long history of short-term bonds, something subtle but important has already happened. Her relationship instincts have been shaped by repetition. Pair bonding becomes harder not because she wants it to be, but because her nervous system has adapted to a cycle of excitement, detachment, and reset. Stability feels unfamiliar. Calm feels underwhelming. Predictability feels like stagnation rather than safety. This is where men make their first critical error. They assume desire and readiness are the same thing. They are not. Desire pulls toward a person. Readiness pulls toward an outcome. One is about who you want. The other is about what you need. When a woman says she is ready after 30, the question is not whether she wants commitment. The question is what is driving that readiness, because what men often step into at this stage is not being chosen for who they are, but for what they represent. Stability, timing, resources, reliability. These are not insults, they are assets. But assets alone do not create desire. They create suitability. And suitability without desire leads to a quiet imbalance that surfaces later as resentment, criticism, and emotional distance. The dating market does not operate on fairness. It operates on leverage. In her 20s, leverage is driven largely by youth, energy, and optionality. In her 30s, leverage shifts toward outcomes, family, security, timelines. When leverage changes, selection criteria change with it. Not because values evolved overnight, but because the market did. Men need to understand this without anger and without denial. This is not about shaming women for their choices. Choices always come with consequences, for both sexes. Men who delay responsibility face their own costs. The difference is that male consequences tend to be financial and social, while female consequences are biological and psychological. The asymmetry matters. What you are often seeing after 30 is not a woman who suddenly discovered commitment. It is a woman who has run out of room to delay it. That distinction is uncomfortable, but it is foundational. Because when commitment is driven by constraint rather than desire, the relationship begins with a hidden deficit, and deficits compound over time. In the next section, we will examine what specifically changes after 30 that alters behavior so dramatically, why urgency replaces selectiveness, and how men misinterpret pressure as passion. Because if you cannot tell the difference between being wanted and being needed, you will mistake obligation for attraction and pay for it later. To understand what really changes after 30, you have to stop thinking in moral terms and start thinking in systems. People respond to pressure. Markets respond to scarcity. Biology responds to time. None of these forces care about intentions or narratives. They respond only to constraints. For women with a high partner count, the first major shift after 30 is not emotional. It is mathematical. Time stops being something you spend and starts being something you lose. Fertility does not decline gradually in a way that feels gentle or forgiving. It drops in a way that forces decisions. The margin for error shrinks, the room for indecision evaporates, and once time becomes a constraint, strategy replaces exploration. This is where men misread urgency as attraction. Urgency looks like enthusiasm on the surface, faster replies, strong interest, direct conversations about the future. But attraction pulls you toward a person without demanding immediate closure. Urgency pushes toward resolution because delay is dangerous. One is organic, the other is pressure-driven. When a woman with a long history of short-term relationships enters her 30s, she is no longer selecting partners based on excitement alone. She is selecting based on viability. Can this man commit? Can he provide stability? Can he meet timelines? These are rational questions. But rational questions do not create emotional bonding. They create evaluation. The problem is not that evaluation exists. The problem is when evaluation replaces desire entirely. A relationship that begins with assessment rather than attraction carries a hidden imbalance. One person feels chosen, the other feels measured. Over time, that imbalance becomes corrosive. There is another shift men rarely account for: comparison fatigue. High partner count does not create wisdom by default. It creates reference points. Every past relationship becomes a silent benchmark. Every disagreement is weighed against previous experiences. Every flaw is magnified by memory. This does not happen consciously. It happens automatically. The mind does not erase past intimacy simply because someone wants to move forward. It stores it. And when you have stored too many comparisons, satisfaction becomes fragile. No man is competing with one ex. He is competing with a collage of remembered highs, selective memories, and idealized moments that never had to survive long-term reality. This is why some women appear restless, even in stable relationships after 30. Stability does not feel rewarding if the nervous system has been trained on volatility. Calm feels empty. Peace feels dull. Consistency feels like loss rather than gain. This is not a character flaw. It is conditioning. Men often believe that once commitment is secured, things will settle. The opposite is usually true. Once the urgency goal is achieved, engagement, marriage, pregnancy, the pressure that drove the performance disappears. What remains is the underlying psychology that existed before the commitment was made. This is where resentment begins to form quietly, not because the man did something wrong, but because he represents a trade-off. He represents safety over excitement, reliability over intensity, predictability over novelty. Those are valuable traits, but when they are chosen under pressure rather than desire, they become reminders of what was surrendered. Resentment does not announce itself loudly at first. It shows up as subtle dissatisfaction, as criticism framed as honesty, as emotional withdrawal justified as stress, as intimacy becoming scheduled, conditional, or transactional. The man senses something is off but cannot point to a single cause. That ambiguity keeps him invested longer than he should be. Another critical change after 30 is tolerance for risk. In her 20s, a woman can afford to experiment. Bad relationships are lessons. Mistakes are stories. In her 30s, mistakes are consequences. The cost of choosing wrong becomes existential. That fear does not disappear when commitment happens. It follows her into the relationship. Fear-driven commitment creates control behaviors, timelines, expectations, pressure to conform, emotional tests disguised as communication. These are not signs of deep bonding. They are signs of anxiety seeking containment. And anxiety does not produce admiration. It produces monitoring. Men need to understand this clearly. Being chosen under pressure is not the same as being chosen freely. One leads to partnership. The other leads to obligation. Obligation breeds compliance at first, then quiet rebellion later, and rebellion does not always look like cheating. Often it looks like contempt. Another critical signal is conditional admiration. She praises you when you align with her expectations and withdraws warmth when you assert boundaries. Desire does not fluctuate based on compliance. Anxiety does. When affection becomes contingent on agreement, you are no longer being chosen, you are being managed. Men also need to watch for emotional outsourcing. If she has spent years leaning on friends, therapy, or social validation to regulate her emotions, she may unconsciously expect you to absorb that role once commitment is secured. This creates an uneven dynamic where your presence is required, but your autonomy is inconvenient. Over time, this manifests as subtle control, not overt demands, but emotional consequences. Silence, mood shifts, withholding. These are not communication tools, they are regulation tools, and they are used by people who feel internally unstable, not by people who feel secure in their choices. Perhaps the most revealing signal is how she responds to your independence. A woman who genuinely desires you will respect your separate life. A woman who needs you for security will experience your independence as abandonment risk. She will interpret boundaries as withdrawal and autonomy as disinterest. This leads to friction that never resolves because the issue is not behavior, it is fear. Men who ignore these signals often do so because the surface experience feels good. Attention feels validating. Being wanted feels rare. But attention is not the same as attraction, and being wanted is not the same as being desired. One feeds the ego, the other sustains the relationship. The hard truth is that compatibility is not proven by intensity. It is proven by how well two people function when intensity fades. High partner count patterns often rely on intensity to mask incompatibility. When intensity is gone, nothing stabilizes the bond. Most men don't experience the real relationship until after commitment. Before that point, they are interacting with a version shaped by incentive. After commitment, they meet the default state. This is not deception in the theatrical sense. It is behavioral gravity. People stop performing when the outcome they needed is secured. For men who commit to high partner count women after 30, the shift is often subtle at first. There is no single breaking moment. Instead, there is a slow recalibration of effort. What once felt mutual begins to feel managed. What once felt warm becomes procedural. The relationship still functions, but it no longer feeds the same emotional system. The first noticeable change is desire asymmetry. Early enthusiasm gives way to selective intimacy. Physical closeness becomes less spontaneous and more conditional. Stress, fatigue, mood, and obligation become recurring explanations. None of these are inherently suspicious. What matters is the pattern. Desire that fades quickly after security is not desire, it was leverage-driven engagement. Men often blame themselves at this stage. They assume they became complacent or insufficient. This self-blame keeps them trying harder, which accelerates the imbalance. Effort increases on one side while attraction continues to decline on the other. This creates a loop where the man invests more to restore something that was never rooted in desire to begin with. The second shift is reframing of history. Once commitment is locked in, past relationships are no longer neutral facts. They become weapons or shields. Exes are romanticized during conflict or erased during accountability discussions. The past is selectively edited to justify present dissatisfaction. This is how unresolved comparison resurfaces. Another major shift is control through emotional consequence. Not direct commands, but atmospheres. Withdrawal, coldness, tension. These become tools to guide behavior. The man learns, often unconsciously, that peace is earned through compliance. Over time, he self-polices. He avoids friction. He anticipates moods. This is not partnership. It is emotional management. Men describe this phase as walking on eggshells, but they rarely connect it to the origin of the relationship. They think something changed later. In reality, the relationship simply lost its incentive to perform. What remains is the underlying psychology that existed before commitment but was temporarily masked.
There is also a shift in respect dynamics. When a woman commits out of necessity rather than desire, respect becomes conditional. It is tied to provision, tolerance, and consistency rather than admiration. The man is valued for what he maintains, not who he is. This erodes masculine polarity over time.
This is where resentment matures. Not loud resentment, quiet resentment. She resents him for representing limitation. He resents her for withholding what he believed he earned. Neither side articulates this clearly, because admitting it would collapse the narrative that the relationship was built on mutual desire. Children, if they arrive, do not fix this. They often entrench it. The man's role becomes structural: provider, stabilizer, utility. The woman's anxiety may reduce because the timeline pressure has been resolved, but attraction does not automatically return. In some cases, it declines further because the man's leverage decreases once exit costs rise. Men are often shocked when divorce or emotional disengagement appears years later. They say it came out of nowhere. It didn't. It came from a relationship that began with urgency instead of attraction, necessity instead of choice. The seeds were present from the beginning, but they were ignored because the early phase felt validating. This is why men must judge relationships by origin, not outcome. How something begins determines how it ages. A bond formed under pressure does not relax into peace. It collapses into control. A bond formed under desire does not require management. It sustains itself. In the final section, we will bring this together into clear, practical decision paths for men. Not ideology, not bitterness, strategy, because awareness without action is just delayed regret. And this is where most men fail themselves. At this point, the question is no longer whether these patterns exist. You already know they do. You have seen them in friends, in co-workers, in marriages that look stable from the outside and hollow from the inside. The real question is what you are going to do with this awareness. Because knowledge without restraint is dangerous. It gives you vocabulary without protection. It allows you to see the problem while still walking into it. Men who lose in these dynamics do not lose because they were weak. They lose because they confused availability with desire, urgency with attraction, and reassurance with respect. They believed that being chosen late was the same as being chosen freely. It is not. The brutal reality is this: relationships are not judged by intentions, promises, or how someone feels about you in a narrow window of time. They are judged by incentives, by leverage, by what each person stands to lose or gain by staying. When commitment is driven by fear of running out of time rather than pulled toward a specific man, the relationship begins with an invisible imbalance that never corrects itself. This does not mean every woman over 30 is incapable of love, loyalty, or devotion. That would be a lie. But it does mean that patterns matter more than exceptions when you are making decisions that can cost you decades of your life. You do not build strategy around rare outcomes. You build it around probabilities. A woman who truly desires you will not rush you into obligation while withholding admiration. She will not need to secure you before revealing herself. She will not treat your boundaries as threats. She will not demand certainty while avoiding accountability. Desire is generous. Fear is transactional. Your responsibility as a man is not to rescue anyone from their past, their panic, or their timeline. Your responsibility is to protect your future. That requires emotional discipline. It requires the ability to walk away from attention that feels good but does not feel right. It requires the courage to disappoint someone today rather than resent them tomorrow. You have 3 real paths available to you. The first is to ignore everything you've heard, tell yourself that love will fix structural problems, and gamble that your situation will be different. Some men choose this path because loneliness is louder than logic. Most regret it quietly. The second is to raise your standards and your value simultaneously. To become the kind of man who can choose rather than be chosen. That path is difficult. It requires patience, self-respect, and often saying no when yes would be easier. But it is the only path that preserves leverage. The third is to opt out of traditional commitment entirely until conditions align with reality rather than pressure. This path is not for everyone, but it is far better than entering a long-term bond under false assumptions. What you cannot afford to do is drift. Drift is how men wake up 10 years later in lives they did not choose, married to someone who tolerates them, wondering when everything went quiet. There is no prize for being accommodating at the wrong time. There is no virtue in being the solution to someone else's crisis, and there is no honor in sacrificing your future to preserve a narrative that benefits everyone except you. You deserve a partner who chooses you when she has options, not when she has deadlines. Someone who desires you without needing you to save her from consequences she postponed. Someone whose affection does not expire once security is achieved. If this message forced you to rethink a situation you're currently in or one you narrowly avoided, type "aware" in the comments. If you've lived through this and recognize the pattern in hindsight, type "experienced." The men reading those comments need to know they are not alone. And if this channel has given you clarity that mainstream culture refuses to offer, make sure you subscribe, like, and share this video with the man who needs to hear it before it's too late. The cost of ignorance in relationships is not theoretical, it is lived daily and irreversible.